Are you a high-performing real estate investor who's looking to further elevate your performance? If so, download our free guide, Raising the Bar, 5 Steps to Elevate Your Habits, by joining our insider network at elevatepod.com. This guide, created by yours truly, has the power to put your transformation on autopilot and exponentially change your trajectory. Go get your free copy now at elevatepod.com.
Welcome to Elevate, the masterclass where we dissect the elements of exceptional achievement and lifestyle design with a focus on personal growth and real estate investing. Now, here's your host, Tyler Chesser.
Elevate Nation, welcome back. This is Tyler Chesser. I'm so thankful to have you here. And I'm blessed and grateful to be sitting with Brian Wansink today. And if you've ever used smaller dinner plates to eat less or serve yourself healthier food first, or use myplate.gov, you might have heard Brian Wansink's name. And so we've got a phenomenal individual who has really helped so many people, and in fact, millions of people, make healthier decisions. And it's about mindless eating. It's about mindless, approaches to living a healthier life. And at the end of the day, health is wealth. And so if you want to be a higher performer, it's about how are we removing our thoughts towards how can we live healthier, right? And today is going to give you the tools for doing that. You're going to learn so much about not only mindless eating, you're going to learn more about some practical tips that you can apply immediately to improve your nutrition, to improve your performance as a result, and so many different things. So I think you're going to learn so much. So buckle up. Today's episode is phenomenal. Elevate Podcast is all about mindset, mind expansion, and personal development for high performing real estate investors. I'm your coach. I'm your host, Tyler Chesser, and I'm a professional real estate investor and high performance coach. It is my job to decode the stories, habits, and multifaceted expertise of world-class investors and other experts to help you elevate your performance and lifestyle. Are you ready to take it to another level? It is time to do so. So let's go. Whether or not you're ready, we're rocking and rolling, and we are rolling to the next level. So if you are enjoying Elevate Podcast, I invite you to subscribe, rate, and review, or follow, rate, and review. I mean, they're changing the names of these things here rapidly. So we invite you to, give us a like if you're watching us on YouTube. Thank you. Hopefully I brushed my teeth today. But just so thankful to have you here. So thankful to be able to contribute to you. And make sure you share this with a friend, because at the end of the day, that's the fee for this episode, for listening or for watching. It's just to share this with someone that you care about, someone that you've just met. Maybe it's someone that you've known for a long time. Share this episode with a friend, share it with your social media, your network, and so forth. And at the end of the day, I would love nothing more than to introduce you to Brian Wansink. For over 30 years, he has been discovering easy, mindless ways you and your family can eat better and weigh less, along with school programs such as Smarter Lunchroom Movement. His discoveries and solutions have been published in over 20 languages in books such as Mindless Eating and Slim by Design. He has been a professor at Cornell, Illinois, UPenn, and Dartmouth, and he was appointed by the White House to be the executive director in charge of the U.S. dietary guidelines. So we definitely have a authority on diet, on dietary guidelines, and so many different things. So I just want to encourage you to really enjoy this conversation with Brian Wansink. Brian Wansink, how are you, my friend?
God, I'm doing great, Tyler. Thanks for having me on. This is really cool.
Man, I appreciate your happy attitude, your fun attitude. And I'm excited to have some fun today in this conversation. To me, it's almost like a dance, right? We're going to dance with each other a little bit. And I think something amazing will come of it. So, man, I want to dive into this conversation with you. But before we do, I love to do this. If you could give the audience a little bit more context about you. And the way that I ask this is, if you were to describe yourself in the way that your closest family members or friends or people that have known you for the longest, what would they say about you, Brian?
They say if you've ever tried to eat better or eat healthier without really trying and being mindless about it, you probably know what my husband does, or me in this case, because all my life has been spent on this obsession of how to get people to have more meaningful sort of relationships with each other. but also more meaningful relationships with food in a way where it's not seen as an enemy. It's not seen as something that they have to eat less of, or they have to eat the right thing, but where they can just mindlessly set up their life so they can eat less, eat better, have better friends, have better relationships.
So even the people closest to you would describe you in that way.
No, they'd use words like obsessed, and then they'd roll their eyes and things like that. Yeah.
Obsessed, committed, right?
Yeah, they'd also say that I'm fairly childish.
That could be a good thing.
I prefer childlike, but yes, they would say childish probably.
So, I want to lead into sort of your expertise as far as eating goes and nutrition. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about your upbringing, your backstory and that kind of stuff. Give me a sense of, where you came from and all that good stuff, Brian.
Yeah. I grew up in Sioux City, Iowa, in the western edge of Iowa, next to South Dakota, and grew up. My dad was a production worker in a bakery, and my mom was a secretary, and kind of went to school and kind of got the idea, oh my God, I can change the world if I become a professor. So I went to professor school. Then I've been a professor at some really, really cool universities I've been really pleased to be at. And all of my work is focused on how can people set up their lives so they mindlessly make smarter decisions without having to think about it. How do they mindlessly set up their lives so that they eat the right stuff? How do they mindlessly set it up so they have the right relationships with people and things like this? And I've been really fortunate because this has turned into some impactful books. It's President Bush called me, and I took a 2-year leave of absence as a professor to go be in charge of the dietary guidelines for 2 years while he was in office. It turned into a bunch of cool things. So if you've ever eaten off of smaller plates so that you mindlessly eat less, that's our stuff. If your kids have ever gone to their school lunchroom, which was a smarter lunchroom, which is redesigned, so the easiest, healthiest stuff was easiest to eat, that's my stuff. If you've ever seen the My Plate, the new dietary guidelines, and your wife, your husband, or your kids have said, you should eat more like that, that's my stuff also.
That is cool. That's really awesome. And man, it's almost like, I almost feel like thanking you for your service to our country in some ways, obviously with being a part of the administration in that capacity. That's awesome. It's so cool to be able to look back and say, well, wow, you've contributed so much. You continue to contribute so much. And so, going back to that kind of central theme, it's like mindlessly setting up your life so that you can expand in these different categories. Obviously in one capacity, it's nutrition, but where did you become so fascinated with this mindless approach to growth in all of these different categories? Yeah,
that's really a really great question. So I was in my PhD program. I was out in Stanford, California, and you read about how people make decisions, and it's just, the theories are so laborious. You read them and you say, geez, that's not the way I make a decision. I don't come up with all, the different sort of attributes and weight them and kind of come up with some decision metric. I don't know how I make most decisions. And I thought there's got to be some explanations for how most of us make these decisions every day that we really don't give much time to, but get made nonetheless and influence our life. Like if you were to ask most people, if you were to say, hey, why'd you have a soup versus salad for lunch today? Most people kind of go, Now they might try to give an answer. It's probably not the real one. If you say, well, why did you eat all of it versus part of it? Or why did you eat all of your chips instead of least of your chips? Or why did you order a root beer instead of a Coke, whatever? People wouldn't be able to answer why that happened. Yet those decisions they pile up and make big decisions in our life in the same way that the decisions we make about what we might do or say with our spouse has a little bit of an impact every day, or one direction or the other. And I thought, God, this is so interesting because inherently it's really important, but it's not cool to study. So I thought, I've never been cool. And at the time, I was maybe 30 years old. I said, and it's probably too late to happen now. So I'm going to study this mindless stuff.
Man.
Yeah.
That really resonates with me. I think you're cool, by the way. I'm going to give you the cool stamp of approval from Elevate. You deserve to be cool, man. This is so, it's really interesting because it comes down to habits, right? And at the end of the day, most of our life is driven by habits. And some experts will say 80+% of our daily actions are habits. And that's mindless, right? And if we thought about all of our habits, we would be overwhelmed and we wouldn't make it to noon, right? We wouldn't make it to lunchtime. So, that's really, really insightful. And so thinking about how can we mindlessly move in the direction that we want to move, which is kind of what you're just describing. But one of the things I like to start with why, like kind of like Simon Sinek, it's like, let's start with why. What's the purpose behind this? What's the purpose behind this discussion? So I'd like to know from you, the expert, why is it important for high performers or people who have lofty goals to be focused on healthy habits and focused on nutrition and what they're putting in their body? Why is that important?
Yeah, so they don't ever have to think about them again. That's why, so you can stay focused with most of your brain capacity on what really turns you on and what you think is going to drive you to the next level, what's going to make you sort of achieve your vision or goal. Because the thing is, if you're spending a lot of time thinking about, well, should I go on a diet, or, what should I do about my misbehaving son or daughter, or what should I order for lunch? What should I do for lunch? You're losing capacity that you could otherwise spend really performing at your top in the field. You could otherwise spend that time not having to have 20% of your brain thinking about lunch or whatever, but instead 98% of your brain thinking about something else, only 2% of your brain thinking about when you're going to have lunch, not why and what and where and how much.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you could be a salesperson now as well, because you're selling me on the idea. That makes a lot of sense. Let's think about it once. Let's set it. Let's forget it. And let's approach this lifestyle in a way that, well, now we can make important decisions. We can focus on the things that are important, right? So let's talk about this. So mindless eating, where would you start with someone who has no concept of what this is all about and so forth? Where would you start in terms of building a foundation on mindless eating towards the direction that you want to go?
Well, so first they need to realize that we are all tremendous victims of mindless eating. The smartest people in the world who seem to do the best, craziest stuff, the best, smartest stuff, if you were to ask them why they ate what they ate for breakfast today, they wouldn't know, okay? Because these things influence us so dramatically. And so we've done tons of studies where we've gone into theaters and we've changed the size of popcorn buckets. And in one case, what we did is we went into movie theaters and we gave people popcorn in like those really huge buckets, the ones that cost like $12.
Yeah. Or they're probably 15 these days.
That's the bigger size. The one that costs 15. That's right. And we gave them this popcorn. It was just stale, 3-day-old popcorn. It's like those styrofoam pellets. And when people got there, we gave them free popcorn, either large or small, and it was this terrible popcorn. And what happened was when people left the theater, we found that the typical person who was given the super large, nobody finished their popcorn. People was given the big bucket, ended up eating like about 30% more, like about, it would have been close to 700 calories more popcorn.
Wow.
If you say, and when we asked them, I said, why did you eat so much? Was it because you're hungry? They go, no, man. I had dinner before I got here. Okay. Well, was it because the popcorn was really good? No, are you kidding? It's horrible. Two people even tried to ask for their money back. It's just like, no, it's free popcorn. Give your money back. But because those are the two excuses why people usually give you why they overeat. Okay, they'll say, I was really, 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 really hungry, or I was really, 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 food is really, really good. But when we ask them, well, do you think it might have been the size of the bucket? Like almost to a person, people will say, no way. There's no way something would influence me like that. And this ends up being sort of the key to mindless eating. Is the reason it hurts us so bad is most of us think that we're immune to it. We don't think that the distance of the cereal box from where we're sitting is going to have any impact on whether we have a second or third bowl of cereal. We don't think that where the serving bowl is in the table, whether we're eating with our family or whether we're serving after dinner, we don't think that's going to influence us at all. We don't think that the size of a plate is going to influence us, the shape of a glass. And that's why this stuff has such a big impact, is because people almost refuse to acknowledge that it could influence anybody. We think we're smarter than a bowl. And so once people can kind of say, you know, I can see that if a bowl of chips is sitting within 2 feet of me, I'm going to keep eating until it's probably gone. But I can also see that if that bowl of chips is 4 feet from me and I've got to lean to get it, maybe I'm not going to eat them until they're gone. And once people start saying, okay, well, let me try. Let me make some changes like that to make it mindlessly easy, so I'm not thinking about whether I want another handful of chips, but I just don't do it. Once people can kind of acknowledge that, then that's a great way, because then all of a sudden it opens up a whole bunch of things that people can do that can kind of curb the vexing thing that's kind of, you know, maybe not keeping them where they want to be with respect to their health or their nutrition or weight or whatever.
So understanding, obviously, this subconscious, you know, behavior can allow you to put, you know, sort of guardrails in your environment that can protect your mindless, you know, habits, so to speak. Could you tell me, does this relate to Parkinson's law? Is it Parkinson's law that says, you know, you tell me a little bit about Parkinson's law. I see your face lighting up here. I'm curious.
Yeah, actually, because almost all those laws, and I'm not exactly sure what Parkinson's law is right now. I was just thinking of a bunch of other laws.
Okay. I can take a stab at it. I think what I understand Parkinson's law to be is that if you have a certain amount of resources or food, it's like, it just somehow you find a way to consume it, right? Or if you have a certain amount of money in your bank account, you somehow find a way to spend it. And so this is the natural behavior. And if we understand that that's the natural behavior, how do we put some guardrails around that environment? And I'm probably butchering it, but that's how I understand it. I think
that's perfectly. It's the great reason why anytime somebody ever goes to Vegas, they win $100. The advice is cash that out right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, if you have chips, walk away. But there's this feeling, right? There's this feeling that, well, there's more than, you know, because I think about like evolution a lot, right? Human beings have not always had, you know, as much food and things that we have at our disposal today. And so our ancestors millions of years ago, or even tens of thousands of years ago, if there was more to consume, that was a smart thing to do, right? Because when a rainy day comes or when the winter comes, you've packed up some resources and now you can make it through this challenge. But that's no longer the case in current society. Does that resonate with you? Yeah,
that's exactly right. So what people try to do then is they try to use their willpower to say, I've got an embarrassment of wealth around me, or an embarrassment of food, or whatever you want to call it. But I will use my willpower to not whatever consume it, to not blow that money I made in Vegas, to not blow the extra whatever commission I got, to not eat all the chips that are sitting in the car seat next to me. Okay. But and that can work for some people. I mean, some people, and especially if that's what you do full time, is diet full time or think about food full time. You know, like some people do. I mean, that's what a lot of nutrition people do. A lot of people in the health business and health field, that's really what they do. Their kind of full-time job is just to focus on food. But for most of us, that's a little sliver of our lives. We got bigger things to do and bigger lives, different lives. I don't mean bigger. I mean, we have different priorities. And for us, it's a whole lot easier, rather than to focus on it, to set up the things so that we don't have to focus on it, so that we can let just nature take its course in eating less. And like I mentioned, a person even doesn't have to be a big believer. You just have to start trying things. So for instance, we found simply by using this smaller plate, most of us eat off plates that are about 11 inches, but just going down to under 10 inches, we'll typically serve about 20% less food on just a slightly smaller plate, because 20% less, let's say 4 ounces on a 9-inch plate or 10-inch plate, looks like a full portion. That same 4 ounces on an 11-inch plate.
So is the theory that most people are eating too much? Is that still the case?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So people are consuming too many calories, or is it a certain amount of, or specific type of food that people are eating too much of?
So the typical person on average needs about 2,000 calories a day. Okay. And 2,000 calories is kind of the equivalent of 8 candy bars. Okay. 2,000 calories a day to neither gain nor to lose weight. Okay. They have 9 candy bars, they gain weight. They have 6 or 7, they lose a little bit. Okay. But that's 2,000 is where you just are mainly just to maintain things. Now, if you were to say, I'd like to lose, let's say 20 pounds. Okay. I'm going to do that by eating half as many calories every day. Well, first of all, you're going to hate yourself. You're going to hate everybody in the world. You're going to hate your dog. You're just going to hate everything because you're going to just feel miserable.
You're going to be mean.
Yeah, that's right. And what's going to happen is both psychologically and physiologically, that's going to backfire on you. It's going to backfire physiologically because your body goes into the kind of the caveman mode you're talking about earlier, where it says, starvation's coming. I better really start conserving energy, and your body actually slows down and starts burning calories at a slower rate. But psychologically, it also backfires because when you cut things out, you're typically cutting out things that have salt, which we need. It cuts out sugar, which we need. It also cuts out fat, which also we need to some extent. So if we cut those out of our diet, we really, at some point, pretty soon, we're going to figure out some way to rebound and get them back into our diet. And that might be later tonight when all of a sudden we eat salads all day. And then at nighttime we sit down, we finish off chips during a movie, or it might be 3 weeks from now when we decide to go off our diet of the month and just go back to the way we were. So instead of doing that, just making these little small changes that keep you within about 200 calories of that 2,000 calorie limit is the way to do it. Because if you do that, your body doesn't realize anything's going on and there's nothing to sort of push back against. So, if you can figure out a way without yourself really knowing it, to eat 200 or 300 fewer calories, not much more, but that much, you're not going to realize you're on a diet or that you're getting healthier. And eventually you're just going to find that each week things kind of drop down a little bit more.
So when we think about the total amount of calorie intake and we think about, all right, let's be mindful of the total that is coming in and let's try to stay in that sort of range. Now, I would think the next step would be, all right, well, what type of nutrients are we engaging in, right? Or are we taking into our body? You could correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that there's a certain amount of, carbohydrates, there's a certain amount of fats, there's a certain amount of, sugars. And so give me a sense of that. And then let's talk about the half plate rule that you set forth as well.
Sure. That is what gets people really confused. And just like I mentioned back when I was in my PhD program, I'd say, do people really make decisions like this? It's like, geez, nobody I know makes decisions like this. And when it comes to a lot of nutrition, our grandmothers had a pretty good instinct about what was healthy and what was not healthy, what was the right portion and the wrong portion. And I think in our heart, most of us know that too. We know that an apple's better for us than a candy bar. We know that certain things are better than other things. And being reasonable, not trying to trick ourselves, I think we'll probably fall within that range almost automatically.
Oh, interesting.
But I believe the real easy rule of thumb, and I was in charge of the dietary guidelines, and that wouldn't have been the answer I could have given 10 years ago when I was at the White House. But that's the way I kind of see things now. But really, the simplest rule of thumb that you can use, I believe, when trying to figure out what to eat for dinner is you say, okay, here's my deal. We're gonna call this the half plate rule. You take your plate and you just visually sort of divide it in half. Okay, so you have 2 semicircles. You say, okay, half my plate needs to be fruits, vegetables, and salad. The other half can be whatever I want. Okay. It can be barbecued ribs or whatever, but half has to be fruits, vegetables, and salad. And you say, well, I don't know that if I'm going to be full if I only have half a plate of barbecued ribs and baked beans and coleslaw and whatever, French fries. It's like, well, if you want a second plate, you can get a second plate. But again, half of it has to be fruits, vegetables, or salad. The other half can be whatever you want. We find that people doing this, it's a great sort of like in the field rule of thumb to use. And what we find is people report that they eat a little bit less as a result. In some cases, just because you have a full plate of food, it's just like, really, I don't like fruits, vegetables, and salad that much to go back a second time. So you stop. But other people decide to do that, and they still end up filling themselves up with healthier food to some extent. So it's a really cool thing, a really cool rule of thumb to use.
So it's almost, it seems like your approach is just keeping it simple, right? It's don't overcomplicate it. It's here's the rule. But what other tips or practical, approaches? I love that you call yourself, by the way, a pracademic, because you're practical in the way that you study this and approach this. It's like, what's going to really resonate and what are people really going to be able to stick with for the course of their life, right? So what other practical tips do you have?
So one thing is there's 5 areas in your eating life that tend to mess us up, 5 basic areas. And one of them is meal stuffing. That's just like eating way too much at meals, having thirds and fourths or whatever. Okay. Another snack grazing, where we just sort of kind of go, yeah, I'm working at home today. Wonder what's in the fridge. And so we could walk up there and then we walk around and then we look at our desk and say, anything in here? Nope, not in there. And snack grazing ends up being another area. Now, a third area ends up being desktop or dashboard dining. And that's primarily eating while we work. Okay. It's not really intentionally going for a snack, just sort of mindlessly doing things while we're driving in the car, while we're driving back from a gig, or while we're celebrating a sale or a good meeting, we buy something on the way back. The fourth area ends up being the area of it's party binging. And essentially, it's kind of, those are the 3 big areas I talked about. But party binging is essentially kind of, you're fine, but then all of a sudden, you go to a friend's place for dinner and all of a sudden there's appetizers and people are standing around and you just go, or maybe there's a reception somewhere and you kind of do the same thing. And if you look at these areas, the thing about these areas is that we can all kind of identify with them, but at any one month in our life, there's one of these that's probably more problematic for us than others. Okay. Now, it might be that, I don't know, the desktop dashboard dining has been really a bad one for you because COVID's gone over and you've got a lot of driving going on and stuff like this. So the thing to do is to not make a million changes in your life. You want to make some mindless changes that you can make once and then forget about. And you only have to do these for a month, okay? And you get to choose what they are. So the idea is you find whichever of these things is most problematic. Let's say it's snack grazing. It's you're working on your computer, then you come over, you go up and get some meat, then you come back and work, and then go, God, I'm starving. You say, well, what are 3 changes? What are 3 little bitty changes I can make just for 1 month, for only 1 month, that if I were to do them every day, they wouldn't really put me out. They'd be kind of easy to do. And I think they'd take care of that snack grazing. Okay. It might be something as easy as saying, okay, well, I'm going to not have any food on the counter upstairs. Okay, that's one change. I'm going to make sure everything's packed away. Another change is, that breakfast cereal stuff. Yeah, I'm not going to eat any breakfast cereal right out of the box. If I can pour it in the bowl, I'll let myself pour it in the bowl, but I'm not going to eat out of the box. My third change is, I can snack while I watch TV, but I've got to go up and get it in the other room. I can't bring it out here. Whenever I get out there, I've got to put it in a bowl or a plate and bring it out to the TV. I can't just bring the whole thing of M&Ms out, or the whole thing of cookies, or the whole thing of potatoes. So let's say you make 3 changes that are very easy to make, and as long as you make them, they're not really going to put you out. They're not like going on a diet. You say, well, would those move me in the right direction? And if you do those every day for a month, at the end of the month, you kind of say, okay, great. I do those. If they're working for me, maybe I'll keep 1 or 2 of them. Maybe I won't keep any of them. But now let me look. Now it's the end of this next month. Now what's most problematic for me? I am really lucky that my partner is an amazing cook. But, I tend to really eat a lot of what they make. I think this month, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what are 3 little changes I can make at mealtime that's going to make it really easy for me to eat just a little bit less? I'll tell you, as guys, one thing is we find that with your serving dishes, if you keep serving dishes off the table, neither on the stove or on a serving board or on the counter, you're going to eat almost 30% less of any food you have over there versus here.
So you should put the vegetables on the table, but leave the other stuff.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Yes,
because you want to eat 30% more of that, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because you'll fill up on that too. So you say, well, what are little changes that you can make that can move in that direction? And in my first book, which is Mindless Eating, I kind of say, here's all the studies that we've done, these crazy studies we've done in restaurants and cafeterias and in people's homes, looking at what works and what doesn't work for people. But a lot of these things you just make up yourself. You can say, well, what would work for me?
Hey guys, just a quick word from our sponsor and we'll be right back to the show. This episode of Elevate is brought to you by CF Capital. And you know how much I love real estate and how it can be a vehicle towards creating any outcome that you want in your life, which is really why we created CF Capital. It's a real estate investment firm that focuses on acquiring and operating multifamily assets that provide stable cash flow, capital appreciation, and a margin of safety for our investors, for our partners, and for the people that we serve. Our team leverages its expertise in acquisitions and management to provide investors like you with superior risk-adjusted returns while placing a premium on preserving capital. Our mission is to provide property investment and asset management solutions to help investors maximize their returns by investing in high-value multifamily communities. Our philosophy is that we can elevate communities together through this process. And I want to invite you to go check out cfcapllc.com because we have a free ebook that's called The Bottom Line, the 10 ways to increase cash flow in an apartment complex. And I want to tell you that this is a value-packed ebook. So I want to invite you to go check that out right now at cfcapllc.com. I think you're going to get a ton of value just from reading this, whether you apply it to your own business or whether you educate yourself further on what it would look like if you invested with CF Capital. So go check that out at cfcapllc.com. Again, that's cfcapllc.com, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Interesting. Today's kind of society, there's all, different fads, diets, and different ways to approach eating or even lack thereof. Right. And one of the biggest things today is intermittent fasting. So what's your take on intermittent fasting and what sort of impact does that have?
Well, the neat thing about intermittent fasting, I'll put that just conceptually, I'll put that in the same category as the let's call it the all you can eat ice cream diet. Okay, I'll put them both in the same category. and I'm putting them in the same category but what they both do is they totally disrupt a pattern for a day. Okay, your pattern for the day might be to get up, kind of look at your watch, go, oh my gosh, I'm almost late. Run downstairs, grab a couple of handfuls of breakfast cereal, and eat them out of your hand. I'm just kidding. And then going to being starved all morning, maybe grabbing a couple of donuts. So you've got a kind of a set of patterns that go on during the day. But if you fast, it's just like, wait a minute, I can't do any of that. If you're on the ice cream diet, you can't do any of that either. You can eat ice cream all day, but you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. And really, at some point, you're going to go, I really am getting tired of this. So both of those things end up being effective. Not necessarily because they cut the number of calories, but because what they do on the next day is make you more aware of what you're doing that probably isn't that smart.
So from a pattern interrupt standpoint, it's valuable is what you're saying. So every now and then, perhaps it's a valuable practice is what you're saying. But what if people say, look, I want to do an intermittent fasting where I'm doing 16-8, whatever. Is that anything that you've studied? Is there anything that you would say about that?
Yeah. So we've did 2 studies on fasting. And so they're both kind of cool. I think they're both really cool. So one of them we did was actually in a grocery store. We took people, we put them on an 18-hour fast. Okay. No, this is at a buffet. We put them on an 18-hour fast and they went through a buffet. And what we found, and then I think that was interesting was, and these are compared to people who had been on, who hadn't eaten for 5 hours. So that's the comparison is. So what we found is that when they went back to food, they ate a little bit more. I mean, you'd expect somebody on the fast to just kind of go, blah, 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 blah. They didn't. They ate a little bit more, but not that much more. But here's what happened. They ate a whole lot worse.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what happened was we had meat, different kinds of meats, different kinds of carbohydrates, different kinds of vegetables. I mean, like carbohydrates would be there's pasta, and I think we had like fried potatoes and something else. And then we had different kinds of vegetables, and and then we had desserts. Okay, it was what we had for the 4th kind of thing. And people could go through this buffet and take everything you wanted to. And like I said, in terms of actual calories, both people took roughly the same. I mean, it wasn't like people on a fast took half again as much or whatever. They took roughly the same. But what they took was all garbage.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the first thing they took was all carbohydrates. They took, not all carbohydrates. They took by far the most carbohydrates, and then desserts. I guess you can say carbohydrates, but then desserts. They took very little vegetables, and they took a reasonable amount of meat. Whereas the people who hadn't been fasting took more meat. They took more vegetables, and on average. So that's warning.
That's interesting. So I think about, you've been mentioning vegetables, obviously vegetables, salads, fruits as half the plate. So if you were to think about vegetables and fruits, what are some of the most optimal, what's the best nutrition? Is there anything that you point to in particular on that side of the plate that you really want to encourage folks to continue to consume, or nothing in particular?
It's just like anything. People say, well, I don't know, avocados, they have a lot of calories. And it's like, really? Well, why don't you eat enough avocados to have to worry about calories? I don't think you can. And I think with most fruits and most vegetables, people start like counting the calories in a grapefruit or something. Like, no, count instead the calories you're not going to be eating in bread or in waffles or whatever, because you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. So I think I see almost all of those as almost a calorie-free solution to eating less carbs and eating less bread.
That makes sense. How much water should people be drinking? Because you've always heard the eight glasses a day, is that still the case?
Well, I also drink a ton of diet pop too, but I think I think drinking a lot of fluids, it's just recommended in general. The idea, well, does it fill up your stomach and make you likely to eat less? We've tried a couple of studies on that, and we never found what we thought would happen, which is the obvious stuff. But another thing that is interesting, and I think this is looking at protein, is that and this is just qualitative research we found, but one of the things we find is that the more snackable proteins that a person has in their house, the easier they claim it is to eat healthier. Okay, so for instance, and one of our recommendations with some of the people we've worked with in some other situations have been to have at least 6 different single servings of protein in your house. Those could be cheese sticks, it could be an egg, it could be beef jerky, it could be turkey meat, it could be yogurt. But it's when you have none of that stuff, which is the stuff that really fills you up and can be really satisfying. So when you have none of that is when you look in the refrigerator and go,
give me the chips, give me whatever, yeah.
That's right. And Tyler, I meant to say too that we don't know, but we believe the reason why people coming off a fast tend to go for those carbohydrates and for the desserts is that they really give the most instantaneous energy because that stuff gets converted to sugar right away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned that this fasting thing. So I was just really quickly telling others, we did this other cool study where we took people who are fasting and we looked at what they bought when they went to grocery stores. We looked at people who hadn't eaten for a long time, what they ate when they went to grocery stores. And you always hear people say, don't shop on an empty stomach because you'll buy more food.
Is that true?
No. We found again, they buy the same amount as somebody who just had lunch. Somebody who's skipped lunch and somebody who ate lunch, they're going to buy the same amount of food. But what they're going to buy is different foods. People have skipped lunch and are hungry, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to buy the stuff that they can basically eat out of the box on the way out of the parking lot. They're buying more carbohydrates. They're buying more, again, candy. They're buying more ready-to-eat stuff, cereals, chips, things like that. Just because your whole body, your whole brain's saying, I need energy right now. I can't wait to go out and grill a chicken breast.
Speaking of shopping in the grocery store, I've always been told to, try to stick around the edges, right? Because if you're buying something out of a box, it's more likely to be not, good for you in comparison to some of the fresh stuff or even some frozen things, in terms of frozen meats and so forth. Does that resonate with you as well?
Yeah, it does. But also I think don't overlook the canned food aisle because
that's good.
They always talk about, fresh fruits and vegetables. No, frozen are just as good, and canned are even more affordable. You might want to rinse them off in some water, but they're even more affordable and they're good too.
That's awesome. Brian, I want to transition a little bit. I want to switch gears and I want to talk about just living a life of never-ending learning, because that's kind of what you've been about. I feel like that's what you've demonstrated, over the past 30 plus years in your career. You started with, hey, look, I'm not cool. I'm not going to be cool. So this is what I'm interested in. And I'm going to go this direction. I'm going to share it with people. I'm going to continue to grow. But tell me about that. I mean, what has this life of never-ending learning meant for you?
Well, one thing, I think we can talk about never-ending learning, but I think learning is a functional sort of thing. And if we kind of say, I want to be the smartest woman in the world or whatever, that's once you hit a rough patch, that's just going to fly out the window and it's going to stop. But I think the thing that can be sustaining is when you believe you're learning for a purpose. And, I believe a really great purpose is when you believe that learning is going to be helping others. It's in service to others in one way or the other. And so in a number of years ago, this was, I guess maybe 30 years ago, I kind of came up with this idea of developing 101, I call them forthcoming contributions and accomplishments. Okay. That were kind of benchmarks as to whether I thought I was helping people in the way I wanted to do. And some of them, of course, were just more personal for me, like, do this or do that. But most of them are very other-centric. And having this list of 101 things and some of them are very sublime, but most of them are pretty banal. But every year I look and I cross off the ones that two or three that I might have accomplished, and I put two or three more back on there. And I think having this goal-directed kind of view and looking at this list very frequently is that it naturally kind of leads you to say, what do I need to learn? Or what do I need to discover so that I can start doing some of these things that I want to do? And I think when you have a goal-directed reason for learning, again, whether it be to help others out or whether it be to better yourself so that you can be a better service to others or whatever, I think it's motivating, but also it's going to get you past the patch of anything you might set up that's just inherently a selfish thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you that because you just strike me as someone who's just so curious, and it just never ends. That's one of the things that I've learned about myself, is that my curiosity keeps getting deeper. When I ask another question and I learn something new, I uncover a gap in something else that I didn't know. And it's like this little, this discovery process. It just never ends. And it's just fun. It's a fun way of life. But the way that you described in terms of the purpose is it's not just that fun. It's not just what you receive, but it's what you give as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was really fortunate when I was when I was maybe 19 years old, I was selling Amway in college to try to pay tuition in college. And I think initially it wasn't going very well. And this guy said, well, why don't you read this book? And he gave me this book. And, this book really transformed my life. And I bet I read it in college. I bet I read it 35 times. And since then, I've probably read it another 15 times. Even this is really nerdy. Even last year, during the COVID thing, I made my three daughters, who were all like in junior high, I made them read it, and we'd have family discussions every day. So, but the
book is it?
But the book was written in 1959 by a guy named David Schwartz. And it's called The Magic of Thinking Big.
Yes, love that book.
Yeah, and then I've read it, I've underlined it, I've given copies to dozens of people. And the powerful thing about something like that, or with a book like that, especially rereading it until things become second nature, is you start maybe looking at learning as it's a great end in itself, but it can also be a means to an end of things that are limitless. An impact you might want to have that's limitless. And I think that's really a really powerful driver. This is kind of cool. I had we had a neighbor a couple doors down, and she had the big real estate company, and she had been like a teacher in high school, and then decided to become a real estate agent. And then she turned from a real estate agent to she had her own agency. Then it became the agency in the Finger Lakes area of New York State where I live, and her name was everywhere. It's just all these things. And I know she and her husband were for dinner one time, and I was talking about, well, what is it? Well, there were over a number of times. At one time, I asked her what it was that she did that. She goes, well, I said, kind of what you do it's for a lot of people, it's kind of a commodity. You just happen to be in the right place in the right time. And that's how you're able to make it sell. She goes, yeah, but she says, that's not the way that you build a business. That's the way you make one sale. Yes. But if that's the way you view this business, you're not going to become this person. You're going to stay here. She said, what she did is she would always set things up so that it would go in the future. And I'd say, well, what would be an example? And this is so cool. She said, I always ask people what they do as agents that they think made a unique difference. And then she makes a note. And she says, like one thing, I've sold a house. Somebody's going to be moving into, 330 the Parkway. And hey, it's done. The deal's done. I'm on to my next thing. I'm on to my fourth thing after that. Forget it. Old news. She goes, no, what I do is, she said, the day before they move in, I go and I buy a bottle of wine, and I have a little card that says, enjoy this bottle of wine for you to celebrate your first night in your new home. I mean, something as small as that. And she said, these people will make referrals, and what they'll say is, this woman gave us a free bottle of wine for her $300,000 home. But this woman, like I said, she would always be asking people, what do you do to add value? That's distinct. That's actually objective, not just, well, I give good service. And she always made note of these. And it was in service of her building future clientele.
You know what it reminds me of is a phrase, and you talked about the magic of thinking big, the book. It's thinking big and acting small. Thinking big and acting small and doing something, thoughtful for someone else is, it's when you combine those two things, I think that is the power. And I always believe that if we can think bigger, then more becomes possible. And I'm almost drawing a delineation of your story. I mean, you were working on behalf of the United States executive branch, sharing your wisdom. And I would imagine it came down to you thought big. And then when you got there, you acted small, right? You acted small and you thought about, how we can help people consume less and get to an optimal weight and so forth. And man, this has just come full circle. I just really appreciate this, Brian. I want to be respectful of your time. I want to transition into our rapid fire section of the podcast. We call it the rare air questionnaire. It is about making decisions that are a bit uncommon, right? We can't breathe too much, but we're going to continue to climb the mountain, right? So we were just talking about a book there, which you and I share a reverence for. If you had to point to 2 or 3 of the most impactful books you've read over just the past few years, is there anything that comes to mind? And if so, why?
Yeah, so the magic thing. I have reread that in the last couple of years, and I reread it all the time. I love the book. I think that another book though that I think is really, and I read dozens, I think almost a month. But the book that really because usually if I get like 2 or 3 ideas out of a book, I can go, that was great. That was worth it. That was worth it. But this book, I bet I got 30 ideas. I remember typing up notes. There's so many. There's a book called by a guy named, his name is Carey Nieuwhof, and it's not spelled. It's spelled like in a Dutch way, so it's Nieuwh, Eif, but it's called "Didn't See It Coming." Okay. And what it's about this guy saying he'd been a minister for all of his life. I guess he still is. And he'd counseled and been with lots and lots of people. It's how people in their middle age, tend to really get blindsided by stuff. And it's about the 6 things that really, really tend to blindside people, why they blindside you, and what you can do, but like great advice on what you can do when this happens. I mean, it can be everything from like getting fired or from having like a spouse all of a sudden say, "Oh, I didn't tell you, I'm leaving today." I mean, it can be all sorts of things like this to all sorts of these problems. And even if these things have never happened, his contention is that one of these things is going to happen to everybody, at least at some point. But even if they don't, just reading this thing and saying, wow, okay, well, I can see where that could be the cause. Let me not do that again.
Yeah.
Super, super useful. Really,
cool.
Really interesting. Yeah.
That's cool.
I think that's probably, that's the one that has the most news you can use. That's pretty much general for any sort of overachiever, because that's really what's directed at. It's directed at real overachievers, because underachievers oftentimes, I think, don't risk these huge setbacks in life that very ambitious people have. Yes.
That is the calling that we've set ourselves on. And so the question is, all right, how are we going to deal with those disappointments? You discipline those disappointments, or are you going to crumble in the face of those disappointments? So that's awesome. I will check that one out myself.
Tremendous.
Yeah, we'll put links in the show notes as to where the listeners can find those books, as well as where they can find your books, Brian. So yes, I'm looking forward to sharing those. And I've just got a couple more questions for you. If you had to say the biggest way that you elevate your life on a daily basis, what would you say about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I spend the first part of my day in quiet time, some you might call it meditating or prayer or whatever. And that's the way I spend it. But I mainly focus on the things I'm super, super grateful for that happened, just that either are happening now or have happened. And what I find that it does is it's almost like when you thank somebody for something, for instance, or when you focus on what you're grateful for, you don't mail it in after that. After that, it's motivating actually just to articulate something you're grateful for. You don't say, "Oh man, really grateful that I've had a month's worth of workouts and I haven't injured myself. So go back to bed. No, you don't do that. You do a month in one day.
That's great. That's great. Gratitude, right? And spending time alone. That's awesome.
Yeah, and even at nighttime with my family, when we sit down to dinner, we have all I have 3 daughters. Everybody, including my wife and I, have to say what our high point is that day, our low point, who we appreciate most that day and why, and then what our compass is going in the future. And the thing that's so elevating about that experience is also ends up being elevating for other people, because somebody saying, I really appreciate my assistant swim coach because, she doesn't yell at me like the normal coach does. And she really makes me think that even though I kind of aren't very good this season, that I'm the one who's going to get the better the fastest. And then all of a sudden, you can't have like a discussion like that without your daughter who just said that the next day kind of treating that person differently or better.
Yeah. It all rubs off on each other, right? Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that leads in very nicely to my next question, which is, what's the biggest way that you elevate others around you?
Well, I think the nice thing about that example is that I think in some ways that elevates 5 different people every night we do it, because we all mention a different person. I think all think a little bit different about somebody after that. But in terms of the way I consciously, actually, I include people in my meditation or my prayer who I want to elevate. But I think doing the small things that you talk about are things that I try to do, but I'm really positive that I do all of the wrong small things. I don't do probably, but I try.
That's a good reminder for all of us. You don't have to be perfect, right? And Brian, what an awesome conversation. I've had a lot of fun today. And I think that, what we've learned about today is not only healthy habits, but also the way to really be happier, to live. Perhaps you want to live longer, you want to make more impact. I think that today's conversation was so important for that. But is there any parting thoughts or words of wisdom that you'd like to share with Elevate Nation today?
Well, I really appreciate what you do, because I think, you've heard that, your attitude determines your altitude and stuff. And those I think are very true. They're all very true. But I thought that for, over 30 years as a professor, my biggest competitive advantage was hope. Okay. I always had hope that my papers would have more impact. I'd always have hope that the ideas I discover were useful to people. I'd always have hope that this next semester I'd be an even better professor than I was last year. And I think as long as a person has hope, you really keep those feet driving. Okay. But once you kind of lose hope in any way, okay, that's when all of a sudden things start not just to stop, but I think they start to roll downhill in some ways. And it becomes really hard to get that going. So anything a person can do to insulate your hope and to grow it, whatever means that is, whether that means eliminating some toxic people, whether that be moving to a different company, whether it be starting your own, whatever it is, I think it's worth really extreme measures to protect your hope in the future.
That's remarkable. Remarkable statement, remarkable, reminder, or even call to action for all of us, right? There's some way that we can preserve our hope even more so in our life. And that really resonates with me. So Brian, thank you so much, man. I want to acknowledge you for contributing so much to so many people, for continuing to challenge yourself, for continuing to elevate others around you. You are phenomenal, my friend. And in terms of where Elevate Nation can find you, brianwansink.com. Brian Wansink on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, actually Twitter. But where else? Where else can the listeners find you?
I'd say primarily just the website, brianwansink.com.
Got it. We will put links in the show notes as to where Elevate Nation can find you. So you want to go check that out. But Brian, until next time, my friend, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's great, man. Have a great rest of the week.
You do the same. Elevate Nation, I want to encourage you to re-listen to this show. I want to encourage you to share this with someone that you care about, someone that you maybe have just met, someone that is new to your life, or maybe someone that's been around for a long time, and help them understand how they can, not only protect and preserve that hope for their future, but how they can expand their own health, their own wealth as a result, and so many different capacities. So I want to encourage you to re-listen to the show, identify your top 1, 2, or 3 key distinctions, your biggest takeaways from this episode, because there's a lot of easy stuff here. It's not about making stuff more complicated or more complex. It is about making things easy and applying them immediately. And that's really at the end of the day, is the most important thing, is to take massive action. What's one thing that you can apply today, whether it's put it on your calendar or really put it into practice immediately. And so I just want to challenge you. I want to encourage you. And I want to thank you so much for listening to Elevate Podcast today. Until next time, Elevate Nation, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to Elevate. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to elevate your results by taking immediate action on what you learned. For more, visit elevatepod.com.